Thanks for tuning in to the Mini Book Podcast. If you're enjoying the insights, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, let's dive in.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're setting our sights on the stars, but maybe not through the usual rose-tinted telescopes.
Right. We're looking at space settlement, the real possibilities, the implications.
We want to dive deep into what it would actually take for humanity to, really live and thrive off Earth.
Exactly. Our goal in this deep dive is to give you a realistic picture. We'll cover the complexities, the hurdles people don't always talk about, and just the sheer scale of it all.
And guiding us through this is primarily the book A City on Mars by Kelly and Zach Weinersmith.
Yeah, it's a great source. What's interesting is their backgrounds, right? Kelly's a biologist.
And Zach's a cartoonist. Which honestly brings this really refreshing perspective. Skeptical, but you can tell they're deeply fascinated.
They've clearly done their homework. It's such an honest look at what it would really be like up there.
And that honesty is key. They're not, selling timeshares on Mars.
Not at all. Their focus is realism.
Yeah.
Highlighting the challenges, they call it the suckitude of space settlement.
Which sounds blunt, but it's important. Their work is kind of a guide, helping us maybe avoid some dangerous paths, both out there and, frankly, back here on Earth.
Precisely. Because you probably heard the buzz, space settlement is exciting.
Totally. But those grand visions, they can easily overshadow the, fundamental practicalities, the huge obstacles.
Yeah, the things standing between us and becoming truly multiplanetary. So this deep dive, it's for you if you want to look past the hype.
If you want to grasp the real complexities involved.
And what makes A City on Mars stand out is that commitment to honesty. It's pretty rare in popular science, not shying away from the tough stuff.
Right. We're talking everything from, the constant threat of radiation
to the surprisingly complex world of space law, and even some pretty unsettling possibilities, thankfully theoretical, like space cannibalism.
Okay, yeah. So definitely an eye-opening exploration ahead.
Buckle up.
All right, so let's unpack this. When we talk space settlement now, you can't ignore this feeling of a revolution in space access, right?
Yeah, since the mid-2010s especially, launch costs seem to be dropping.
You see the reusable rockets, SpaceX and others, and you might think, okay, the biggest hurdle is solved.
That's definitely the perception. And the Weinersmiths acknowledge the tech advancements, the lower costs are real, but their main point is the biggest barriers now, they aren't really technological anymore, they're biological and economic.
The squishier, more complicated stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The stuff that gets less press than shiny rockets.
And they really stress the danger of ignoring these things, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. They argue if we rush in without truly understanding these biological and economic complexities, well, we could be setting ourselves up for social disaster in space.
And even creating new risks for Earth in the process.
Yeah. Which leads us nicely into debunking some common arguments for space settlement. The book tackles these head-on.
Okay, let's start with the big one. Space is an escape hatch. Earth got problems, climate change, nuclear war threats, asteroids. We need a plan B. Yes.
Right, you hear that a lot. But the Weinersmiths are pretty blunt here in the short term. Space settlement is not a practical lifeboat for those kinds of calamities.
Because even a really damaged Earth.
It's still by far more habitable and self-sufficient than any space colony we could build anytime soon.
Makes sense. Surviving here might need basic tools. Surviving in space needs incredibly complex tech we struggle with even on Earth.
And they make the point that true economic independence for a settlement might need, millions of people?
Billions. Yeah, that's not exactly a quick evacuation plan.
Not even close. So, argument number 2. Space is full of vast, untapped wealth. Asteroid mining will end scarcity and therefore conflict.
The lure of space gold. Or platinum, I guess.
It's compelling, no doubt. But the book injects some realism. Sure, there might be resources. But wars, they happen for so many reasons beyond just scarcity.
Religious differences, power grabs, misperceptions.
Exactly. Finding a giant platinum asteroid probably isn't going to magically fix human nature.
They also bring up something called celestial white flight, which is a bit provocative.
It is. The idea that space becomes an escape, maybe for the privileged, from Earth's problems, rather than a solution for everyone. It raises tough questions about who benefits.
Okay, what about the argument that it's just in our nature? A deep human urge to explore. Carl Sagan, the open road.
Yeah, that's a powerful, almost romantic notion. And the book admits it's hard to argue directly against something so broad.
They look at historical explorers, human migration.
Right. but they're careful not to say, see, that proves we're destined for space settlement. It's a big leap from exploring Earth to building self-sustaining colonies light years away or even on Mars.
Fair enough. And the final big argument. Space will unite us, working together on this grand project.
We'll bring humanity together. It sounds nice.
But the evidence.
Not so great. The International Space Station, right, often hailed as this symbol of cooperation.
But it hasn't exactly stopped wars or geopolitical tension, has it?
Not remotely. The whole Russia-Ukraine situation impacting the ISS is a pretty stark example.
The book also critiques those surveys where astronauts say they feel more connected after spaceflight.
Yeah, apparently they often don't give neutral or negative options, so it's a bit skewed. Of course, they feel something profound, but does it translate globally? Probably not.
And astronauts are amazing, but they're a tiny, highly selected group. Not exactly representative.
Right. And you can have profound experiences mountain climbing, too, for a lot less money, as the Weinersmiths dryly note.
Okay, so the romantic ideals need that reality check.
Yeah.
Let's get into the harsh realities then, the actual space environment, starting with radiation.
Yeah, this is a big one. Outside Earth's magnetic shield, you're constantly bombarded by high-energy particles, galactic cosmic rays, solar particle events.
And this isn't just like a mild sunburn risk.
Oh, no. We're talking acute radiation sickness, vomiting, skin burns, worse. High doses are lethal. And the long-term cancer risk is a major unknown.
And the current plan for, say, lunar missions is basically hide behind stuff, use whatever mass is available.
Pretty much. Which is fine for short stays, maybe, but for a permanent settlement, not ideal. Plus, you've got these extreme solar events, like the Carrington event back in 1859.
That caused telegraph systems to spark.
Right, exactly. An event like that today, or the near miss we had in 2012, could fry electronics on Earth. Imagine what it does to a space habitat's life support. Critical failure.
And shielding isn't simple either. There's this thing called spallation.
Right, where the high-energy particles hit the shield and actually create secondary radiation, which can sometimes be worse. It's counterintuitive.
So how much do we actually know about the long-term health risks?
That's the problem. The data is limited and imperfect. Lab animals, Chernobyl survivors, Hiroshima and Nagasaki victims. It's hard to directly apply that to the chronic, different type of radiation exposure in deep space.
As one paper quoted in the book puts it, there's no definitive evidence. Space radiation causes cancer in humans, but it's reasonable to assume that it can, which is not comforting. Not at all. And NASA has this 3% risk of exposure-induced death limit, which sounds like a safety margin, but...
It gets complicated.
Yeah.
Because some tissues, like female reproductive organs, seem more sensitive. Some studies suggested maybe excluding women from long Mars trips, which is obviously problematic.
But even experienced male astronauts might hit the limit on a Mars mission.
Potentially, yes, under current limits. The proposed workaround: have veteran astronauts sign waivers, basically accept the higher risk.
Wow. That really highlights the scale of the radiation challenge.
It absolutely does. Okay, moving from radiation to something more tangible. Microgravity, or lack of gravity.
Floating looks fun in videos.
It probably is initially, but the body doesn't like it long term. Muscles atrophy, especially in the legs. Bones lose density significantly.
And the spine actually lengthens, causing back pain.
Yep. There's that anecdote from a shuttle flight in '84, 5 men on board, all had bad back problems. The one woman, Judy Resnick, totally fine, shows the severity and maybe individual differences.
And medical emergencies must be a nightmare. Surgery, with everything floating.
Exactly. Blood pooling weirdly, instruments drifting. It's a massive challenge. Even partial gravity on the moon or Mars helps a bit, but it's still an alien environment with limited kit. Trauma medicine becomes critical and expensive. Remember Apollo astronauts tripping over their own feet.
Yeah, good point. Okay,
Yeah.
now for the delicate subject. SpaceX and babies.
Crucial for long-term settlement, but yeah, not often discussed openly.
The practicalities of sex in zero-G sound.
Mhm.
Awkward. Elastic bands. Snuggle tunnels.
Velcro suits, apparently. There was even a space Chevy van concept in the 70s, but the real concern is safe childbirth.
With a pelvis potentially weakened by bone loss. In microgravity or partial gravity?
Precisely. They've even floated the idea of a mom centrifuge to simulate gravity during birth, which just sounds intense.
And after birth. Worries about baby's bones developing properly without Earth gravity.
Huge worries. You can't put an infant on an exercise bike. Weighted onesies on Mars? Maybe. But we just don't know how kids will develop healthily in lower gravity.
And the atmosphere inside habitats. Not quite like Earth's.
Maintaining perfectly Earth-like air is costly, energy-wise. NASA has these limits, SMXs, for contaminants. But even on the ISS, CO2 levels can get high enough to cause headaches. Imagine that long term.
All this leads to the multi-generational question, doesn't it? Can humans reproduce and thrive over generations off Earth?
That's the billion-dollar question, really. We have virtually no systematic data on mammals completing multiple generations in space. Conception, birth, growing up, reproducing again, all off Earth.
So many unknowns. What gravity level is needed for healthy development? Could space-born humans even return to Earth?
And what about their immune systems? Growing up in a relatively sterile environment, then coming back to Earth as germ soup, we just don't know?
Okay, what about the mind? Space
Yeah.
madness, is that a real thing?
Science fiction loves that trope. But the reality, based on long space flights and Antarctic missions, seems less dramatic, especially for screened professionals.
They cope using comforts, fresh food, nature sounds.
Yeah, countermeasures help. Berezovoy listening to birdsong on Salyut, Terry Virts making that Sounds of Earth playlist. They find ways.
But there have been incidents. Missions cut short.
There have. Salyut 5, maybe bad smells or crew friction. Alexander Levikin on Mir had heart issues, but later mentioned depression, even suicidal thoughts. So the mental toll is real.
And astronauts might hide problems to keep flying.
Yeah, that's a factor. Eileen Collins mentioned it, Valentina Ponomareva too. There's pressure to seem okay.
So maybe not constant breakdowns, but if something does happen psychologically?
It could be much more dangerous in an isolated settlement with limited support. That's the concern.
Right. Okay, let's talk specific locations. Our moon. What are the big challenges there?
Number one is probably the dust, the regolith.
That stuff sounds nasty.
It is. Super fine, like talcum powder, but incredibly abrasive, made of sharp, glassy fragments. It gets everywhere. Wrecks equipment seals, spacesuit joints.
And breathing it in. Long term.
Big worry about lung damage, something like silicosis. John Young on Apollo 16 complained you couldn't read anything after rubbing the dust. It even likely killed the Soviet Lunokhod 2 rover by coating its radiator.
And the temperature swings. 2 weeks day, 2 weeks night.
Brutal. From way above boiling point in sunlight to colder than anything on Earth in shadow, because there's no atmosphere to moderate it. Big challenge for habitats and power.
But there are potential upsides. Lava tubes.
Yeah, potentially huge. These ancient volcanic tunnels could offer pre-made shelters, natural shielding from radiation and micrometeorites. Some might even have stable, almost Earth-like temperatures inside. That's a massive potential shortcut.
And those peaks of eternal light near the poles.
Or near eternal light. Areas that get sunlight almost constantly, great for solar power. And the temperatures there, while still freezing, are much more stable than the equator. Maybe made-in-me 70 Celsius average in summer near the South Pole? Cold but manageable, like Antarctica. Could be prime spots for early bases.
Okay, moving out to Mars. The main event for many people. Though John Young had that grim quote.
Send old men to Mars because they're gonna die anyway. Yeah, highlights the risks.
And the book stresses, Mars is not a near-term plan B.
Absolutely not. Even compared to a badly damaged Earth, Mars is incredibly hostile. The travel time is months. Rescue, impossible in any timely way.
Plus a communication delay, minutes each way, no real-time help.
And economically, forget shipping Martian rocks back for profit anytime soon. Maybe tourism, research, services, not resources.
But there are reasons Mars is attractive, right? It has the key elements.
It does. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, and crucially, lots of water ice, both near the surface and buried deeper. Probably easier to get out than lunar water trapped in rock.
And the climate, while harsh, is maybe less extreme than the moon in some ways.
In some ways. It has an almost 24-hour day, like Earth. Equatorial summer temps can hit room temperature briefly, but the average is super cold, like -65°C, and poles get much colder. Still, better than vacuum.
Mars also has a positional advantage for future asteroid mining.
Potentially. Closer to the belt, lower gravity than Earth, thin atmosphere might even be useful. Its moons, Phobos, and Deimos could be stepping stones. And of course, the search for past or present life continues to drive interest.
What about skipping planets and moons altogether? Giant spinning space wheels.
The classic rotating space station. The big appeal is artificial gravity from rotation. That could solve many of the health problems of microgravity or partial gravity, especially for reproduction.
And they might be useful hubs in a developed space economy. Easier to get to and from than a deep planetary gravity well.
Exactly. You could even have different gravity levels on different rings of the same station. Very versatile, theoretically.
And briefly, Mercury. Any chance there?
Probably not for large settlements. Extreme temperatures, obviously. There's that wacky idea, as the book calls it, of settling the Terminator, the moving line between day and night.
But you'd have to constantly move your entire city.
Yeah. Logistically. Mind-boggling. Let's stick to the moon, Mars, and stations for now.
Okay. Let's switch gears to daily life. Commerce and consumption in space. Will it be all Star Trek idealism?
History suggests. Probably not. We've already seen commercial stuff, right? That Mere Milk ad, Taco Bell trying to hit a target with the deorbiting station.
Product placement too. Cupo Noodles, Radio Shack, KFC.
Really? Apparently. So yeah, expect commercialism. Meanwhile, basic stuff like toilets is still tricky. Remember the Inspiration 4 issues?
Right. Though human waste is a resource, potentially.
For closed-loop systems, yes. But effectively recycling solid waste is still hard. Urine recycling on the ISS is state-of-the-art yesterday's coffee, as they joke.
Space food has improved, though, right? From tubes of paste.
Definitely. Freeze-dried got better. Then station menus, especially the Russian side, sounded decent. Sausage, chocolate, fish, and space tortillas. Solving the crumb problem.
And booze. Official banned on ISS, but...
It has a history. Cognac and whiskey reportedly smuggled onto Mir French wine on Salute. So future settlements probably depends on the rules they set.
What about growing food? Plants in space.
Early experiments show they grow, but differently. Stress responses change. And that Martian simulant soil you hear about, it's not real Mars dirt. It mimics texture, some minerals, but lacks the tricky chemistry, like perchlorates.
So the ultimate goal is closed-loop ecosystems, like Biosphere 2.
Exactly. That Arizona experiment, though it had problems, taught us so much about the complexity of self-sustaining environments. It wasn't NASA, interestingly.
And the big lesson was?
We need systems that let humans thrive, not just survive. And that we desperately need more research in this area. It's hugely underfunded compared to, say, space stations.
Powering all this. Can't use fossil fuels.
Not really. Most renewables are out too. Hydropower, no water, wind. Mars's atmosphere is too thin for useful turbines unless they're enormous. Geothermal, maybe on Mars, but Moon's quiet.
So it comes down to solar and nuclear.
Pretty much. Solar needs massive arrays on Mars, hundreds of square kilometers for a city, especially since energy needs per person will likely be higher off-world.
So nuclear seems more practical for density. Fission reactors, RTGs.
Yeah. Despite public perceptions, space nuclear has a decent safety record. U.S. flew SNAP-10A back in '65. Both U.S. and Russia used RTGs for decades on probes. For serious settlements, especially energy-hungry ones, nuclear seems almost unavoidable.
And building the habitats themselves, surface structures are hard.
Which brings us back to those lava tubes on the Moon and Mars. They're sealed and usable. Game changer. Pre-built, shielded volume. Just build inside them. Huge advantage.
Okay, shifting focus again. How did we even get here? The history of rocketry.
Well, early ideas existed for ages, but progress in the US and USSR was initially slow. Various reasons.
Germany was the early leader, wasn't it? Hermann Oberth.
Absolutely. His 1923 book really kicked things off, inspired amateur groups like the VFR, the Society for Space Travel. Dangerous work, but vital. Wernher von Braun got his start there.
And then after WWII, the scramble for German tech and engineers.
Yep. Both the U.S. and Soviets wanted that V2 knowledge. Von Braun and his team surrendered to the Americans, forming the bedrock of the U.S. space program.
Which leads us neatly into space law.
Yeah.
How did that even start?
A big trigger was the U.S. Starfish Prime nuclear test in space in 1962. It messed up some satellites, made people realize, uh-oh, we need some rules up here.
So it wasn't just about exploration heroes, more about power and preventing war.
That was definitely a huge part of it, preventing the Cold War from escalating into orbit, avoiding a 19th century-style land grab on the Moon and planets.
Hence the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. Still the main framework today.
Largely, yes. Though whether it's still fit for purpose with private companies like SpaceX, new geopolitical tensions, that's debated. Some see it as a triumph of peace, others as just cementing the Cold War status quo.
And it's notoriously vague in places, right? Like peaceful purposes.
Totally unclear. And where does airspace end and outer space begin? Kármán line. Higher. Lower. Does it depend on missile defense ranges? Big implications for suborbital flights.
But Article 2 is pretty clear. No claiming territory.
Crystal clear on that. National appropriation is not subject to. No flags planted claiming Mars for Spain.
But you can use space. Build bases, mine resources.
That's the dominant interpretation, yes. Use without ownership. The U.S. is pushing this hard, arguing resource extraction isn't appropriation. Those NASA contracts to buy lunar dirt for $1, that's about setting a precedent, making it customary law.
And nations are responsible for what they launch, including Neil Armstrong's poo bags.
And space junk, yes. Nations retain jurisdiction. The treaties mostly worked for non-interference, but maybe that was just because space was expensive. Now, with more countries aiming for the moon, we'll see.
Attempts to clarify things, like the Moon Agreement in the 70s, failed.
Yeah, the big space powers didn't sign on, so we're stuck with the 67 framework, mostly. The book even touches on wilder legal ideas like survival homicide in space. What are the rules if oxygen runs out?
Grim stuff. But apparently, most people in survival situations choose not to kill.
Surprisingly, yes, they tend to face death together. Though one analyst, Eric Seedhouse, did explore space cannibalism scenarios. Let's hope it stays theoretical.
And the tragedy of the commons applies too, like a shared cricket farm on Mars.
Perfect example. Without clear rules or ownership, shared resources get depleted. Privatization might be one answer, controversial as it is.
Are there Earth analogs, like Antarctica?
The Antarctic Treaty System is often mentioned. It cleverly sidesteps sovereignty, claims existing ones weren't recognized, new ones banned, claims just sit there. It's kept the peace for 60-plus years, focused on science.
But it bans mineral exploitation, which could be an issue for space resource research.
Potentially. An attempt to regulate mining there, Cramera, failed due to sovereignty and environmental concerns. But the ATS model is somewhat reassuring, keeps a path to a commons open.
What about the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS?
Another model, more widely ratified than the Moon Agreement. It preserves the seabed as a commons, but does allow regulated resource access.
But the U.S. hasn't ratified it.
Nope. Worried about the seabed mining rules and the precedent for space, though the U.S. also says much of UNCLOS is just customary law anyway. Generally, it works, manages resources, promotes cooperation.
What about alternative ideas for owning space stuff? First come, first served.
Like lock-in homesteading, mix your labor with the land, or asteroid, you own it. Gives first movers a big advantage. But how much can one entity realistically mix labor with? And ultimately, the launching nation is responsible under the OST, not the individual company.
Didn't Newt Gingrich suggest the U.S. just declare mined moon areas unincorporated territories?
He did, back in '81. Trying to find a loophole, maybe arguing the treaty only bans national claims. Wasn't feasible then. Huge international backlash, likely now.
Could Article 2 be amended? Allow possession, but with rules, taxes, land set aside?
Maybe. But risks favoring powerful nations again. Who gets Shackleton Crater first?
Could a space settlement just declare independence? Like that online space state, Asgardia.
Asgardia has a constitution, parliament.
Right.
But lacks what matters under international law. Territory, population, effective government, relations with other states. The Montevideo Convention criteria.
What about self-determination? Like after decolonization?
That usually requires more than just wanting independence. Often involves remedial secession breaking away due to severe oppression. Think Bangladesh separating from Pakistan. Distinct identity, blocked from government, persecution, outside help. Not a path you'd want for a space colony.
And even declarations don't guarantee recognition, like Northern Cyprus.
Exactly. It's complicated. Which brings us to conflict potential. Any truth to that story about a deadly chess game in Antarctica?
The book says likely not. Very little evidence. Violent incidents in isolated bases are rare exceptions.
But the company town model in space is a concern. Owners controlling the biosphere, the air, huge power imbalance. Workers can't easily just quit and go home, like on Earth, much less labor mobility.
And how many people does it take for a settlement to be truly self-sufficient anyway?
Estimates vary wildly. One suggests maybe 1 million. Another, Strauss, thinks more like 100 million to 1 billion. North Korea isn't self-sufficient at 26 million.
So again, no easy plan B. If we can build self-sustaining bubbles in space.
We should be able to fix Earth's problems first. That's a core argument.
Have there actually been weapons in space? Besides sci-fi?
Well, survival kits had machetes, pistols, and the Soviets apparently test-fired a cannon on an uncrewed Salyut station.
But space dogfights are unlikely soon.
Probably not. Satellites aren't agile fighters, and there aren't many inhabited targets yet. But militarization is happening, surveillance, communication, potential anti-satellite weapons. Starlink in Ukraine shows the dual-use nature.
Could future space settlements fight Earth?
Unlikely this century, the book argues. They'll be far too dependent on Earth for survival. Conflict seems improbable.
And the idea that space resources end war? Already debunk that? Causes are complex.
Right. There's that anecdote about Congressman Bartlett. Heard a threat of space attack, became a grid defense hawk, then eventually just moved off grid himself. Shows the anxiety, maybe?
The book ultimately argues rushing space expansion could be dangerous, echoing Sagan.
Yes. Sagan and Ostro warned about developing asteroid deflection tech before we achieve peace on Earth. The Weinersmiths worry about creating unjust societies in space controlling reproduction, economics, or one autocratic armed space power.
So what's the path forward then, if not a mad dash?
A cautious wait-and-go-big approach. Focus first on the huge unknowns. Biology, reproduction, closed-loop ecosystems, especially in partial gravity. China's planned monkey experiments are just a tiny step.
So do the foundational research first, maybe in lava tubes or near the lunar poles.
Exactly. Get deep, systems-level knowledge. Develop truly reliable, long-term life support. Prove we can have healthy babies born and raised off Earth, maybe starting on the moon.
And Mars.
Yeah.
Keep researching, but hold off on big settlements.
Yeah. Learn about resource use, cleaning the soil. But don't send thousands until we know they can survive and thrive long-term. Then, when ready, go big. A large, well-planned settlement effort relatively quickly.
Okay. So wrapping this deep dive up, the key takeaway is that space settlement is way, way harder than it looks.
Immensely complex. Biologically, economically, legally, psychologically. Huge hurdles we need to take seriously.
And realism is crucial to avoid dangerous mistakes, both out there and back here.
Absolutely. The Weinersmiths book really drives that home. It's not about killing the dream, but about pursuing it responsibly.
Which leads to our final thought for you, the listener. Considering everything we've discussed, the sheer scale of these challenges.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. Is our big push for the stars maybe distracting us from urgent needs right here on Earth? Or is it actually a necessary investment in our long-term survival and evolution?
Something to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the real possibilities and problems of space settlement.
And if you found this intriguing, definitely check out A City on Mars by Kelly and Zach Weinersmith. It's a fantastic, thought-provoking read.